Howdy folks, welcome to lesson 8 of the CompTIA Network Plus course. As you can see in this lesson, we'll be discussing network types. Now before we start, if you folks haven't done it already yet, you know what to do. Please support the channel by giving it a good old like. It really does make a difference guys, and it really does help the channel when you do that. And if you'd like to follow along and know when the next video goes live, maybe also consider subscribing or joining the family. And if you really like the content and you want to support the channel, you can also go give this video a hype. It might not be available on all the countries yet, that function. It's kind of like a super thanks below the video. It's not available on all the countries, but if it is available and you enjoy the content, maybe consider giving the video a hype. Alrighty folks, that's enough of the intro. Let's go learn about network types. So let's start this video off by first discussing what are the different network types. Now when it comes to the different network types guys, there are actually many, believe it or not, many. And we're only going to mention the main ones in this video. Believe it or not, in this video we don't even cover them all. There is many. So let's list some of them for you guys. The first type of network you get folks, which is actually a very common kind, is something called peer-to-peer. It's a peer-to-peer network. Then we also get a client-server network, which some might say is the exact opposite of a peer-to-peer network. Another very common everyday network you'll encounter is a PAN, not a frying pan. PAN is just short for Personal Area Network. Yep, you actually get a network called Personal Area Network, guys. This one could easily be one of the most common networks you'll actually encounter, even though it's not something we hear every day. Believe it or not, it's probably one of the most common networks we actually encounter. And you'll of course see a little bit more about that later in the video. You also get other networks called LAN, L-A-N, which is short for Local Area Network. This is probably one of the first networks most people in IT will actually become familiar with. And if you're watching this video, chances are you might actually already know this one. Now besides the LAN network, you also get something called a MAN network, or should I say Metropolitan Area Network if you want to use the full name. Then you also get a network called a WAN, or should I say Wide Area Network. And then lastly folks, you also get a network called WLAN, or as some might say, wireless LAN. It's very much the same as the LAN network which we mentioned earlier in the video, except WLAN, hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly, is a wireless version only. If I say LAN, it can actually be cables or wireless. It can be cabled networks, wireless network, but if I say WLAN, it's the same thing except it's limited to wireless. So it's wireless local area network. Alright, now that I have a list of network types going for us here, guys, let's start discussing these network types one by one, starting with the first one here on the list, which is peer-to-peer. Now, folks, with a peer-to-peer network or peer-to-peer networks, no device is a client, nor is any device a server. So it's not a client-server network. They're all actually both a client and a server. Yep. That's right. All devices in a peer-to-peer network act as both a client as well as a server. Now, obviously, as you can imagine, this brings a couple of benefits, but at the same time, it also brings us a couple of drawbacks like you'd expect from any type of network. The first thing to note about this type of network, which is not necessarily a benefit or a drawback, is it's just the way the network works, is the fact that every device communicates or talks to every other device on the network. So some of you folks might have actually already guessed that part though. As soon as I mentioned that every device is both a client and a server, you may or may not have figured that out depending on your experience. Now getting to some of the benefits of this specific network. It's actually probably one of the most easiest networks to set up and deploy, guys. There's pretty much nothing complicated about this network at all. Never mind this network being so freaking easy to go and set up and deploy. It's also one of the cheapest networks to go and set up and deploy, guys. Like you would expect though, this network also has its fair share of drawbacks. What are those drawbacks, you ask? Well, administration with this type of network is very problematic, guys. There is no real structure. With every device being both a client and a server, it's going to be very difficult to control, for example, what people can do and what they can't do. And just general, to go and configure network settings. It's very difficult to go and control all of that. Another drawback, wow, I sound like I'm just moaning now. Another drawback with this network type is it's very difficult to go and secure, guys. Now, this is obviously for the same reasons, once again. If security is of concern, then a peer-to-peer network is obviously not going to be the one for you. Some of the most common places where you'll encounter a peer-to-peer network, guys, is when folks go online to download movies and games. And it's probably going to be from one of those not so nice websites. I'm rather not going to mention it. So a lot of people, especially in IT, they don't like paying for stuff. So they get stuff, that they want via, well, not so nice ways. It's not always very legitimate ways. It usually involves going to some sort of sketchy website of some sort and downloading a torrent, and then that torrent will basically allow you to download this content directly from other people's devices instead of some sort of server online. It's worth noting, though, that this is very dangerous, guys, because you can actually go and download that content from another people's device, and who's to say that you won't be, maybe getting something else extra with that? Something extra like malware. This malware could potentially be, ransomware, it can be spyware, so it's very dangerous to go and do that, not to mention that it's very illegitimate to go and do it that way. So I do not encourage you guys to go and do that. Right, and then folks, let's go back to our list of network types. What's next here on our list? Client-server networks. Now, with the client-server network type, guys, there is a central communication point, and this central communication point is usually what? A server. The clients talk, or should I say communicate with the server, which once again is the central communication point. The clients could be many devices, but in most cases, you'll find it's going to be something like a laptop or a desktop PC, but it can actually be any device. Something else worth mentioning here, guys, is unlike peer-to-peer networks, there is no client-to-client communication taking place with a client-server network. And remember, the clients communicate to a central communication point within a client-server network. This obviously has its own set of benefits and drawbacks, again, like you would expect. Every network has its own benefits and drawbacks. So if you look at the example at the bottom right, folks, here we have 3 devices. Now, instead of these 3 devices communicating with each other, they're all 3 will be going to be communicating with a central communication device, which we spoke about earlier. And this is usually going to be some sort of server of sorts. Okay, and then regarding the benefits of this specific type of network, the first thing is you'll have better performance, guys. Well, at least, especially if you compare this network to the previous peer-to-peer network, then you're going to have better performance. This client-server network will also give you much better administration. You'll have way more control over your network if you use this type of network due to the central communication point, guys. Now, from there, you'll also be able to configure all kinds of configurations, and that includes security settings. Now, speaking of security, that brings us to another benefit. You'll also have much better security. Like we just said, you can go and configure way more of this network, and that includes security settings. You have more control over what people can do and not do, what they can access and not access. This network also has its own drawbacks, one of which is that it's more expensive. At least more expensive than the peer-to-peer network we mentioned previously. The central communication point, which is most likely going to be a server, it is going to be one of the biggest contributors to the additional cost here because, guys, servers are not cheap. I'm not sure if you guys have seen, but they don't come cheap. Another drawback is this network's complexity. It's way more complex than the peer-to-peer network we discussed previously. I mean, that's a very straightforward network. Okay, and then folks, let's go back to our list of networks again. Let's check what's next. Next up on our list, we have the Personal Area Network. Or should I say PAN for short. This one usually confuses most folks, since most have never actually even heard of this network. Funny thing is, This is actually something that most of us actually uses every day, or most of us have been in this network and we just don't know it. Hopefully now you're curious when I say it is something most of us use, but we don't know it yet. So what could it be? What kind of network is this? Okay, so the first thing you need to know about this network, guys, is it's one of the most common networks found. Yeah, it doesn't really help when I say it like that, does it? Second thing you need to know about this is it's one of the smallest networks you'll find. So this small network, being the PAN, also usually only has one person in it. Yeah, I'm serious, folks. Now you're probably even more curious. A PAN network, in most cases, only has one person in it. It might contain more than one device, but it will only have one user. I'm probably confusing the living heck out of you folks, even more by now. Okay, so let's back up a bit. A PAN network, which obviously stands for Personal Area Network, guys, is basically when you have one person with multiple devices. You can imagine this as you sitting at a desk with your desktop PC or your laptop and then just connecting your computer to your printer or your scanner or maybe even connecting to some other mumbo jumbo. So I would basically say anything that's within arm's reach, if you have a big desk, anything that's within arm's reach is technically part of your PAN. So if you've got a printer, a scanner, it doesn't really matter whether you're connecting these devices via cable or wireless. If you go and connect that to your laptop or your desktop, if you've got a phone or anything nearby on that desk that you're connecting to your laptop or your desktop, that, guys, forms part of your PAN. Now, as soon as you go and connect one other person in this mix, then we don't have a PAN anymore. Now we've got ourselves a LAN, which is not a topic here just yet. Alright, folks, and then before we move on to the next topic, one last thing I want to mention with regards to this PAN network is it can possibly also include Bluetooth, infrared, or NFC. So like I said earlier, anything that's within arm's reach, so it could be, via cable, can be wireless, and obviously wireless is multiple things. I mean, wireless can be Bluetooth, IR, or NFC. All of that forms part of your PAN or could form part of your PAN. Now going back to our little magic list here, like usual. So the next one on the list, guys, is LAN, Local Area Network. Now this is probably the one that most of you guys might know already, without me even explaining it. So this network generally is within one building. Generally, it's not limited, it's just generally within one building, but it could extend to multiple buildings. So I've seen quite a few where there might be 2 or 3 buildings in close proximity to one another, and you'll find that they might connect these 2 or 3 buildings, via some sort of means. It might be via wireless, but it's still part of a LAN. Usually you'll find a LAN in your home environment, your office environment, and it's normally not going to extend beyond the walls of that building. But like I said, it could be more than one building that's possibly close to one another. Now, it's not just limited to desktop computers and laptop computers like you might think. These days, guys, LANs can actually include other devices as well. It could potentially include a tablet, it could include phones, and of course, we've got those normal office devices like your printers and scanners and access points and firewalls and routers and. All of that forms part of your LAN. Now, you probably saw there's a bit of a picture here in the slideshow. So there it shows you LAN, MAN, and WAN. So we're going to discuss all of those. So looking at the bottom of this list, being LAN, that is the smallest one out of those 3 in that picture. So a LAN is usually within one building, like we said. It could possibly extend to multiple buildings, but it's usually going to be within one building. And then the MAN and the WAN we'll discuss in just a couple of moments. Now before we move on to the next topic, being MAN, like I said earlier in this video, guys, a LAN can be either wired or wireless. So if we're just talking about a normal local area network, these devices, which are 10 to 1 going to be in one building, they can either be connected to one another via, wires, normal LAN cables, if you want to call it that, Ethernet cables, or they can be connected to each other via wireless, so it's probably going to be a mix of the two, to be honest. All right, and then going back to our list, we probably know what the next one here is going to be. That will be MAN, Metropolitan Area Network. Alright, so the first thing I'm going to mention here, and I'll bring the picture up in a couple of moments, but let me get some stuff out of the way. So the first thing we need to know about this MAN network, which is obviously bigger than a LAN, is it is usually larger than a local area network, like I just said. But at the same time, it is usually much smaller than a wide area network. So I suppose you can call it the middle child. It's in between. It's bigger than a LAN, but it's smaller than a WAN. It's usually multiple LANs in different buildings which are connected together. That could potentially be a MAN. Now, what makes this a little bit different than what I said earlier is these buildings are not necessarily close to one another. These buildings could actually be in different parts of town. So the one building can be on the east side of town, the other building can be on the west side of town. It might be different branch offices for the same company, and these have now been linked to one another with an internal network of sorts over long-range communication. So it's usually going to be in the same town, but it could technically be between two different towns as well. It's not something we see very commonly, but it could actually extend between two metropolitan area networks. You never know. So with that in mind, here's that same picture from earlier again. So now we're ignoring the bottom part there. We're focusing on the middle part, which is the MAN. So it could be two different buildings in different parts of town, or it could just be two different towns. I've got a building in the one town, and I've got a building in another town, which are not too far from one another. And that could still form part of a MAN, folks. Alright, going back to our little shopping list here, if we can call it a shopping list. So, moving on to WAN, the second last one on the list, Wide Area Network. Alright, so I'll bring the picture up in the end. First things first, it's usually used to connect networks over great distances, guys. So WAN, yes, it can be in one country, and it probably will be in just one country, but something interesting about a WAN is it can actually extend across borders. So if you have a branch office or a building in one country, maybe there's a metropolitan area in one country, you can go and connect that to another branch office which might be across the border in a different country for all we know. And that would actually form part of what we call a WAN. So it's generally multiple MAN networks which are connected together. Yes, much, much bigger. So this is the top of the food chain, or almost at the top of the food chain. It could possibly extend over multiple countries, like I just said. It is possible. So this could be 2 or 3 countries which are not too far from one another. It could be. And it's usually way slower than a LAN. I mean, we are, transferring a huge amount of data over great distances. So it's quite common to sometimes see these much slower than a LAN. Although nowadays they're making pretty decent, groundwork when it comes to technology and speeds. You'll find that they're not actually as slow as they used to be. Sometimes you won't even know you're on a WAN unless someone tells you. Now, like usual, there's a little picture, not that we really need it. So we explain LAN, that's basically at the bottom of the food chain if you want to call it that. Normally within one building, if you want to call it that. MAN could be more than one building. It's probably going to be more than one building. They might be possibly in different parts of town, or it could be different towns. And then the WAN is definitely going to be different towns in most cases, and it can actually extend across borders. Quite interesting. Much, much bigger. Alright, and then going back to our list for the last time, folks, WLAN. I'm hoping I'm pronouncing that correctly. So that's wireless local area network. So you probably already know a lot about this network without me even explaining it due to what I said earlier. So we know what a LAN is, local area network. It can be wired or wireless. It's normally within one building. Now, wireless local area network is the same nonsense, except it's limited to wireless. So I suppose you can say this is actually smaller than LAN, technically speaking. It is, but it's not. It's only smaller in terms of you've got less ways you can go and communicate. So a LAN network, which is just wireless, that's what this is. It uses 802.11 technology. So normally if you see 802, that could be wired or wireless. But if you see a .11 behind it, it normally indicates that this is going to be some sort of wireless network. It can be 802.11a, .11b, .11g, .11n. Heck, this can even be AC or AX, just to give you an idea. AX came out, I think, during COVID. It was 2021, if I'm not mistaken. Now, this network, folks, it is sometimes good to use in hard-to-reach areas in a building. I've had some of those in some cases at some of my clients. Sometimes I needed to connect a machine, a laptop or a desktop to the network, but they were in such a not a nice area that it was next to impossible for me to get a network cable there. Instead, in that situation, I would go and use wireless. And yes, guys, it is possible to do wireless over desktop PC. Desktop PCs don't natively support wireless. It's not a topic in this specific lesson. But if you need them to support wireless, you can literally just give them that capability by adding an expansion card in. Now, this wireless version of the LAN, obviously, as you can imagine, has got lots of flexibility. I mean, it penetrates through walls and ceilings and stuff, for crying out loud. It extends easy with just additional access points. So if you have a much larger area you need to suddenly cover now, then you can do that very easily by just adding additional access points. You just plug a LAN cable into that, and ta-da, it's going to go and broadcast that wirelessly for you in that specific area. And it's very good of security. I mean, if you go and look at the networks these days, the amount of security we've got available, it's insane, guys. So this network is very good in terms of security. Alright, folks, that is lesson 8 of the CompTIA Network Plus course. Before you disappear, remember to give the video a like if you haven't done that. Maybe consider subscribing. And that new thing I mentioned, in case you guys haven't seen it yet, it's called Hype. It might not be available in your country, but if it is and you enjoyed this video, give the video a hype. It does help me out when you guys do that. Alright, guys, and then just a thank you to all of you guys supporting and sponsoring the channel. If you want to do that as well, you can find that in the video description down below, so I can make more videos like this. But to those of you that's been clicking on the thanks button below the video, see if it's available in your country, those of you buying me coffee and milkshake, the Patreon sponsors, the PayPal sponsors, thank you very much, guys. Here's a list of the Patreon sponsors or supporters. Thank you very much, guys, for your support. Here's a list of the PayPal guys. Thank you very much for your support. And then, guys, in case you don't know yet, we do have a Discord server. So if you'd like to join that or check it out, it's the very last link at the bottom of the video description. So go check that out as well. Alright, folks, I will see you in lesson 9 of the CompTIA Network Plus course.